My name is Judith, and I'm 32 years old. I've always been driven, ambitious, and passionate about my career. I graduated at the top of my class and landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm right out of college. I've worked hard to climb the corporate ladder, and at 32, I was already a senior marketing manager at one of the most respected companies in the industry. I loved my job, and I was good at it. I had a team of talented professionals who respected me, and my clients loved working with me. But despite my success, I've faced challenges that had nothing to do with my skills or work ethic. Challenges that were rooted in something much deeper, something that I've seen many women in the workplace struggle with. I'm talking about sexism and the subtle, insidious ways it can creep into every aspect of our lives. I've seen it happen to colleagues, friends, and even myself. And today, I'm going to share my story with you. A story that I hope will inspire, educate, and maybe even empower you to stand up for yourself in the face of adversity. I started working at Smith & Co. 5 years ago, and it was a dream come true. I was part of a dynamic team, and my ideas were valued. I quickly proved myself to be a valuable asset to the company, and my career took off. But as time went on, I began to notice strange looks, comments, and behaviors from some of my colleagues. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. But the incidents kept piling up, and I started to feel like something was off. I tried to focus on my work, but it was hard to ignore the whispers, the stares, and the subtle suggestions that I wasn't taken seriously because of my appearance. I was determined to succeed, and I didn't let these incidents get the best of me. Or so I thought. Little did I know, my biggest challenge was yet to come. I walked into the office, greeted by the familiar hum of computers and the chatter of colleagues. My coworker, Benjamin, caught my eye and walked over to my desk. "Judith, you look stunning today," he said. "That dress really brings out your eyes." I thanked him politely, but the comment stuck with me. It wasn't the first time someone had made a remark about my appearance. My boss, Helena, would often make comments about my clothes or hair. "You'd be more approachable if you wore more casual shoes," she'd say. Or, "Your hair looks lovely when you wear it down." At first, I brushed it off as harmless, but the comments kept coming. During a meeting, Elliot made a joke about women being more emotional than men. "Women are just more sensitive, that's all," he said with a chuckle. I felt a knot in my stomach, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to rock the boat. As the days went by, the comments and behaviors continued. Rose would whisper to me about her latest dating escapades, and Bella would make snide comments about other women's appearances. I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells, never knowing when someone would make a comment that would make me uncomfortable. One day, Helena called me into her office. "Judith, you're doing a great job, but you might want to tone down your perfume," she said. "Some of the guys are getting distracted." I was taken aback. "I'm not wearing perfume," I replied. Helena just smiled and told me to be more mindful of my surroundings. I left her office feeling frustrated and confused. What was going on? Why was everyone so focused on my appearance? I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but it lingered. Something didn't feel right. I sat in Helena's office, the fluorescent lights overhead casting an unforgiving glare. She looked up from the papers on her desk, her expression somber. "Judith, I'm afraid we need to let you go," she said, her voice firm but detached. I felt a jolt of surprise, my mind racing to process what I was hearing. "What? Why?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Helena leaned back in her chair, her hands clasped together. "It's just not working out. You're a great marketer, but your presence is distracting. The guys in the office can't focus when you're around." I stared at her, incredulous. "You're firing me because of my appearance?" I asked, my voice rising. Helena nodded, her expression unyielding. "I'm afraid so. It's just not a good fit for our company culture." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is ridiculous," I said. my anger simmering just below the surface. "You're discriminating against me based on my looks. That's not fair." Helena shrugged. "It's just business, Judith. I'm sorry it had to end like this." She stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. I stood up too, my mind reeling with questions and outrage. "What about my projects? What about my team?" I asked, trying to stall for time. Helena handed me a folder filled with documents. "Everything is taken care of. You'll receive a generous severance package, and we'll provide you with outplacement services." I took the folder, feeling numb and betrayed. As I turned to leave, Helena's parting words cut through the silence. "You might want to consider dressing more conservatively in your next job. It might make things easier for you." I walked out of her office, the sound of the door closing behind me echoing through the hallway. I made my way to my desk, my mind racing with thoughts of what had just happened. I gathered my belongings, said goodbye to my colleagues, and walked out of the office building, unsure of what the future held. I walked out of the office building, the bright sunlight a jarring contrast to the darkness of the news I'd just received. I took a deep breath, trying to process what had just happened. I thought about calling a friend or family member, but something held me back. Instead, I started walking, my feet carrying me aimlessly through the streets. As I walked, my mind replayed the conversation with Helena, the words echoing in my head like a mantra. "You're a distraction. It's just not a good fit." I couldn't shake the feeling that this was unfair, that I'd been judged on something I couldn't control. After a while, I found myself at a nearby cafe, sitting at a small table by the window. I ordered a coffee, but it sat untouched in front of me as I stared out the window, my mind racing with questions and doubts. Why had this happened? What could I have done differently? And what would I do now? As I sat there, a woman sitting next to me struck up a conversation. "You look lost," she said, her voice kind. I hesitated for a moment before opening up to her about what had happened. She listened attentively, her expression sympathetic. "That's ridiculous," she said when I finished. "You're talented and capable. You'll find something better." Her words were a balm to my frazzled nerves, and for a moment, I felt a glimmer of hope. But as I sat there, the reality of my situation began to sink in. I had a meeting with my lawyer scheduled for later that week to discuss my options. I wasn't going to let this go without a fight. I spent the next few days researching and gathering information about my termination. I reviewed my personnel file and spoke with colleagues who might have insight into what happened. One coworker, a woman named Sarah, seemed particularly willing to talk. "I've seen it happen to others too," she said. "The company has a pattern of getting rid of women who are seen as too attractive or too competent." I asked her if she knew of any specific incidents or comments made about me. Sarah hesitated, then told me about a conversation she'd overheard between Helena and another manager. "They were talking about how you were too distracting and how they needed to find a way to get rid of you," she said. I thanked Sarah for her honesty and continued my investigation. I discovered that several other women had also been terminated around the same time, all of whom were young and attractive. I started to piece together a disturbing picture of a company culture that valued appearance over talent. I made an appointment with a lawyer who specialized in employment law. "Do you have a case?" she asked after I told her my story. "I think so," I replied, "but I need to know for sure." The lawyer nodded and began to outline my options. "We'll need to gather more evidence and build a strong case," she said. "But based on what you've told me, it sounds like you may have been discriminated against." I left the lawyer's office feeling determined to take action. I was ready to fight for my rights and for the rights of other women who had been treated unfairly. I scheduled a meeting with Helena, determined to get answers. I arrived at her office, my lawyer by my side. Helena looked up from her desk, a mixture of surprise and annoyance on her face. "Judith, I didn't expect to see you again." she said. My lawyer spoke up, her voice firm. We're here to discuss the circumstances surrounding Judith's termination. We believe it was discriminatory. Helena leaned back in her chair, her expression unyielding. I told you why Judith was let go. It was a business decision. I shook my head. That's not true. You're lying. You fired me because of my appearance, and that's not acceptable. Helena's expression didn't change, but her voice took on a slightly sharper tone. I understand that you're upset, Judith, but we stand by our decision. My lawyer intervened, her voice calm but authoritative. We'll be filing a complaint with the EEOC. We believe you have a pattern of discriminatory behavior, and we'll prove it. Helena's eyes narrowed. I'm confident that our actions will be vindicated. The meeting ended abruptly, with Helena's assistant escorting us out of the office. As we left the building, my lawyer turned to me. That went as expected. We'll move forward with the complaint and start gathering more evidence. I nodded, feeling a sense of determination. I was going to fight this, and I was going to win. I reached out to my friends and family, needing someone to talk to. My best friend Rachel answered on the first ring. Hey, what's going on? She asked, concern etched in her voice. I filled her in on what had happened, from the firing to the potential lawsuit. Rachel listened attentively, asking questions and offering words of encouragement. You're going to get through this, she said. You're strong and capable. I also spoke with my sister Emily, who had always been a source of support. I'm so angry on your behalf, she said. That company has no right to treat you like that. Emily offered to help me brainstorm ways to move forward, and we spent hours on the phone discussing my options. I also turned to online forums and support groups for women who had experienced similar situations. I found a community of people who understood what I was going through, and their stories and advice were invaluable. One woman, Sarah, reached out to me directly. I've been through something similar, she said. I'd love to talk to you more about it and offer any advice I can. Our conversation was eye-opening, and I felt grateful for her willingness to share her story. With the support of my loved ones and the online community, I felt more confident than ever that I was making the right decision. I was ready to take on the company and fight for my rights. I sat in my lawyer's office, going over the latest evidence we'd uncovered. It was clear that the company had a pattern of discriminatory behavior, and I was determined to expose it. My lawyer handed me a folder filled with documents. This is everything we've gathered so far, she said. We're ready to take this to the next level. I took a deep breath, knowing that the next step would be crucial. We decided to go public with the story, to use the media to shine a light on the company's behavior. My lawyer nodded in agreement. It's time to take a stand, she said. We're not just fighting for you, we're fighting for all the women who've been treated unfairly by this company. I felt a surge of determination. I was ready to take on the company, to fight for my rights and the rights of others. We scheduled a press conference for the next day, and I spent the rest of the evening preparing my statement. As I stood outside the company's headquarters, microphone in hand, I knew that this was the turning point. I was no longer just a victim. I was an advocate for change. I'm here today to tell my story, I began. A story of discrimination and unfair treatment. But I'm not alone. There are many women who've experienced similar situations, and it's time for us to speak out. The cameras rolled, and my voice echoed through the streets. I was speaking out, and I was just getting started. I stood outside the company's headquarters, surrounded by reporters and cameras. I'm here today to tell my story, I said, my voice clear and confident. A story of discrimination and unfair treatment. But I'm not alone. There are many women who've experienced similar situations, and it's time for us to speak out. The reporters asked questions, and I answered, sharing my story with the world. The company's PR team tried to spin the story, but it was too late. The damage was done, and the public was starting to take notice. I spent the next few days doing interviews and speaking engagements, sharing my story and advocating for change. The response was overwhelming, with many people reaching out to offer support and solidarity. I also received calls from other women who had experienced similar situations at the company. "Thank you for speaking out," they said. "We're so glad you're fighting for justice." I realized that my actions were having an impact, and I was determined to keep pushing forward. I met with my lawyer to discuss the next steps in the lawsuit. "We're getting attention from some big players," she said. "This could be a landmark case." I nodded, feeling a sense of pride and purpose. I was fighting for more than just my own rights. I was fighting for a cause. The company's CEO called a meeting with the board of directors to discuss the situation. "We need to take action," he said. "This is damaging our reputation and our business." The board members nodded in agreement, and they started discussing ways to address the issue. I knew that it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to see this through. I was taking action, and I wouldn't back down. I sat in my living room, reflecting on the past few weeks. From being fired to speaking out publicly, it had been a wild ride. I thought about the women who had reached out to me, sharing their own stories of discrimination and harassment. I realized that my story was just one of many, and that it was time for change. I looked at myself in the mirror, and I saw a different person. I saw someone who had stood up for herself, who had fought for what she believed in. I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. I knew that this was just the beginning, that there would be more challenges ahead. But I was ready. I had grown, I had learned, and I had found my voice. I thought about the company's response, about the CEO's apology and the promises of change. I knew that actions spoke louder than words, and I would be watching closely. I would continue to speak out, to advocate for change, and to fight for what's right. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of determination and purpose. I knew that I would make a difference, that I would be a part of something bigger than myself. And with that thought, I stood up, ready to face whatever came next. I looked back on the journey I'd been on, from being fired to speaking out against the company's discriminatory practices. It had been a long and difficult road, but I'd learned so much along the way. I'd learned that standing up for myself and others takes courage, but it's worth it. I'd learned that change doesn't happen overnight, but it's possible with persistence and determination. And I'd learned that my voice matters, and that I have the power to make a difference. As I looked to the future, I knew that I would continue to speak out against injustice and fight for what's right. I would use my experience to help others, to support them in their own struggles, and to empower them to find their voice. My message is simple. We all deserve to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of our background, our appearance, or our circumstances. We all deserve to be heard, to be seen, and to be valued. And we all have the power to make a difference, to stand up for ourselves and others, and to fight for what's right. I hope that my story will inspire others to find their voice, to speak out against injustice, and to fight for change. Together, we can create a more just and equitable world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. If you're ready to share your own story of resilience and courage, comment below with Tharv Stand Up For Yourself. Let's build a community of empowered individuals who support and uplift each other. Thank you for listening to my story. If you like this kind of content, kindly support the channel by liking the video, sharing it, and subscribing to the channel for more stories like this. Thank you.